My name is Patrick Blaine. I'm the Dean of Languages, Literature, and Communication here at Lane Community College. It gives us all great pleasure to have Elizabeth Woody with us today. Thank you very much to our University of Oregon partners who also helped arrange this visit, and especially to Drew Viles, who has been instrumental in logistics, as well as the Longhouse steward, Beth Daya, who I'll be introducing in a minute. Today we had the great pleasure of having Elizabeth with us. Elizabeth is Oregon's 8th poet laureate and as of yesterday, outgoing, I've been told. Regardless, it's great to have her with us. Elizabeth has had a varied and active career, and particularly in terms of writing and publishing and training younger writers. She's been very active in a number of workshops and nationally. Elizabeth also has put in a lot of time and effort as an environmental activist. So in terms of the awards that Elizabeth has won, and there are many, the two that I just wanted to mention are the American Book Award in 1990, and that was for Hand in a Stone, and also the William Stafford Memorial Award for Poetry. And finally, Elizabeth is an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs of the Yakama Nation and the Navajo Nation. Here to continue introducing Elizabeth is Beth Daya. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Guatsi, Dehenime Wayushra, Tsenahanutsa. Good afternoon, all. My name is Beth Daya. I'm the Longhouse steward here. I'm very happy to welcome Elizabeth Woody here today. I just wanted to remind you all about the Longhouse and its uniqueness. I often tell people to respect the space as you would a child. Clean up after yourselves. No foul languages. Be respectful to each other. And yeah, just enjoy your time here at the Longhouse. I'm just really excited to have you all here. I'm going to introduce Drew Viles.
I'm going to come up and just join you.
Thanks.
We have in our minds to give tokens of appreciation to Liz before the reading. So there's some gifts we'd just walk over. Would you like to do that, Beth?
Yeah, please come up, Elizabeth. We'd like to gift you. This is from the Longhouse. We really appreciate you coming and visiting the space.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a tradition to feed the storyteller. You'll find some tokens of our appreciation along those lines in there. This is also a gift for Dwight. If Dwight wanted to come up, he's been a faithful driver. This is some, you want to say it? I'm happy to give you some swamp tea. There might also be more in the way of welcoming. I have some singers. I've assembled some singers, and we'd like to sing a song of welcome at this point, if that's...
Yes, please. We'd like that.
I'll introduce this singer. This is Jerome Viles. Jerome is a multi-talented person. Chinookwawa instructor here. There's a couple thoughts I've had about songs, and I was mentioning to Liz earlier, we've been out, some of us, to a former hop farm in the Willamette Valley, and it reminded me, Siletz would bring people over from the reservation starting in the 1880s, 1890s, even all the way through World War II, maybe to pick hops. Maybe that ended in prohibition, maybe hops went into decline at that point, but it was a tradition for agricultural workers to come from tribes. Did you know that? And Warm Springs would bring people over to the Willamette Valley. Even as far north, I think, as Yakima would come down to help with the hop harvest. I've heard stories about that in my family. I wanted to mention that as in a formal way because upon restoration, Siletz was terminated upon restoration. One of the beautiful things that happened was that Warm Springs brought a song back to us. It was a song that was shared maybe at the hop harvest, but that's something I'm saying thank you. Liz is Warm Springs, and I'm remembering that Warm Springs people have benefited Siletz people in that specific way by bringing a song they first heard from Siletz people. They took it home. Siletz people forgot it, and then the Warm Springs people brought it back. and we're remembering that history. Is there more to say? I'm going to remember to give a shout out to the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Greg Evans, Vice President here, has contributed towards the travel costs this has incurred. Special thank you to the Language, Literature, Communications Division that is paying a modest stipend for Liz's appearance here. So shout out to Patrick Blaine, Dr. Patrick Blaine. I know that division. This song is a song that is the Chinook canoe family song. It's sang usually at events of that nature. Tony Johnson wanted me to say hello to Liz and has given permission today for this song to be sung in recognition of Liz's visit. Liz is Wasco, among her other tribal affiliations, so there's a resonance with Chinook, a relationship we're remembering that way at this point. Is there more to say about this song? It's a Thunderbird song. It tells a story. There's a dance. We're not going to be doing it today. We'll just start with this song. There's been kind words spoken about Elizabeth Woody, and I'm just going to add that Elizabeth Woody is old school in the sense that she carries forward an ancient tradition of spreading, producing good feeling amongst groups of people. She's a storyteller in that tradition, where the needs of the community, the needs to have a good feeling is what's directing her. And I've seen her do that in talks for the last couple decades. It's a rare ability. I admire her greatly for it, and I'm very happy that you assembled here will have a chance to witness that storytelling tradition that Liz embodies and has devoted her life to. Liz.
First of all, thank you for that song and the story that went with that song. It's very important for us to remember that we carry with us and look toward the future by listening to and understanding what we hear. We may not realize how important it is in the future. I'm just trying to make sure this is stable. I was raised by my grandparents in Central Oregon. My grandfather bought a house in Madras. He was a Yakama Nation tribal member, but born and raised in Warm Springs. My grandmother was Elizabeth Thompson Pitt. She was born and raised at Kanita. Kanita was her great grandmother, I believe, and that land had belonged to her family from the beginning of time. And it was a real point. It was a bone of contention between my grandpa and grandma when my grandfather would say, "We are from the Columbia River," and she said, "No, I'm not. You're from the Columbia River. I'm from Warm Springs River, Kanita." And he'd say, "No, no, no." And she said, he goes, "You're just a Sinasho woman." And she says, "Well, you're just an agency man." So, and I have a story here about them that I might read later on. I don't know. It's actually, I'm going to do a time check. It's 15 till 1. How long am I expected to go before people have to go and attend something else? 1:30. Okay, great. So I have 45 minutes. Great. I have always been very conscious of time. I don't believe in Indian time. And I've been at so many poetry readings where we've been given 15 minutes apiece, and somebody gets up and goes for half an hour. And you think, wow, they should have that vaudeville hook right now. And, and I also know it's very hard to sit for any extended period of time unless you've been trained for it as a student or as a parishioner in a church or whatever, but I like to make sure that I don't overdo my time. But back to my grandparents. So my grandparents were masters at what they did. My grandmother was a she wove baskets, but primarily was known as a bead worker. And you see a lot of these things collected in major museums, but her beadwork, we have none of it left because it was purchased by collectors back east. We do have a picture of her that's not a posed picture, a professional picture that some photographer graciously left her a negative of her wearing her Indian dress and her beadwork, and it's just beautiful. She was also a healer, meaning that she practiced the Indian religion and had her own way of being in the world, and was a twati, is what they call them, twatis. And when she married my grandfather, he was raised in the Presbyterian church and did not think it was appropriate for her to spend all that time doing that, and so she ended up dropping that and then had a lifelong illness of epilepsy afterwards, and people say that's why. Because you don't do something like that and drop it, there's always some sort of payment, I guess is one way of looking at it. But together they raised a family. They raised my mother and my auntie and my uncle, who I write about. Some of the things that they've taught me. I write about the family, the extended family. There are my grandmother's first cousins and second cousins and first cousins twice removed. And all of these are, the only reason why I need to know this is because the reservation's a small place and you're not allowed to marry your cousins. So Dwight always gets befuddled by all these cousins' relationships and how can I remember them? Well, I was reminded every time I'd get a sparkle in my eye at somebody, like, no, that's your cousin. And they would, and then they would go down the family tree. I was brought up in Madras, and I lived in a place that was it was called a pioneer city, pioneer town. And what I didn't know in that being brought up in that pioneer town was a lot about the history of my tribe and the history about the people who came. And it's been my whole life spent as a child and beyond learning about that relationship. And Patty Limerick writes about it. She's a historian out of Colorado. And she says usually American Indian relations and European American relationships were very positive until one no longer served the other in some way. So when American Indians were no longer useful, they were put on reservations. And they were, we had a treaty of 1855. And we're going to have a symposium about the Treaty of 1855 at Warm Springs in October. So hopefully I'll get that information here for you to know about and attend. But the thing about the pioneerism is when I was in first grade, we had a reading contest so that they would assign the Mother Goose who would be the MC for the spring concert. And so I was selected as Mother Goose. Not because I was an excellent reader, but because I had a mnemonic memory and could remember everything that they gave me, and I could recite it without looking at the paper. That's not going to be the case tonight. I no longer cultivate or carry that. But from that point on, I had to wear the only thing they could find that would be appropriate for me as Mother Goose was a pioneer outfit. So I wore a pioneer outfit playing Mother Goose in the spring concert. And that's kind of been why, I guess that was the start of my career, when you think about it. Entertaining audiences, conveying a message, being part of the troupe, and also the love of words. So I think that my grandparents instilled that in me. I read at age 4, read comic books. What we had in our house for a library was a complete set of Bible stories, and we had an encyclopedia, the white one with the green label on it and the gold, I don't know what it's called. And we had a massive dictionary that was this thick, and I read the dictionary, if you can believe that. I did. I loved finding out where words are from. I loved the etymology, I guess is what they call it. But I learned the Latin and all of that just because it was fun. And when I wasn't outside playing on the land, I was reading. My grandparents on my father's side, I'm born for the Totachini, which is the Bitterwater people. They're tall and they're jolly. And when they mean jolly, it's har, 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 and kind of robust. And are considered mediators. That's our clan characteristics. Now, if you're not familiar with clans in the Navajo tradition, there are 3 original clans and ones that kind of, crop up outside, but everybody has a paternal clan and a maternal clan. My maternal clan, I like to say, is from the Warm Springs Confederated Tribes, which is Malith Lama, which is the people of the hot springs, and the Wayampum, which are the people of the Celilo Falls or the echo of water upon rocks. And when I say that in Arizona, and my relatives in Arizona go, because that's so visual, the echo of water falling upon rocks. It's a pervasive sound. So in another sense, I think that's another characteristic, being pervasive, being all-encompassing. And if you ever had talked to anybody who knew Celilo in its original state, it was very peace-generating. The negative eons generated peace. No one could get away from the sound of it. No one could get away from the smell of it. And people from all over the United States, and I think even Canada, other places came to Celilo to look at it. It was one of the largest falls in North America, maybe second to Niagara. And it's a particular type of fall, so it was even more unique in that regard. But back to my grandparents on the Navajo side, my mother was a weaver. My father was what would be the equivalent of a Twati. He was an Indian doctor. He knew all these songs. He had, on his side, on his father's side, he was born for the Jemez clan, or Coyote Pass clan, which is Jemez Pueblo, if many of you don't know. So the person who originated that clan was a Jemez woman. And she was way back, I don't know when. But so I am part, in that sense, Pueblo, part Navajo, but through the clan system, it's recognized as that. Now, why that's important is because I cannot marry anybody in those clans. So if I were to have a sparkle in my eye at somebody, they would immediately find out his clans and say yay or nay. So, and it's kind of odd that that was the way people kept track of it, but it was really important because, of course, if you marry your first cousins over a length of time, you just develop, you generate a bunch of idiots. So most most of the tribes in the United States were not exclusively one set of persons over another. There was constant negotiations. There are stories in Oregon about women who were, they were supposed to be wed to somebody, and they fell in love with somebody from the Rogue River. And this one story I read, and I can't remember the origin of it, but this woman left her village in Celilo or in Columbia River and walked all the way down the Willamette Valley to go and join her sweetheart. And they eloped, which was horrible, but that's what happened. And they became parents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents of some very remarkable people. So the person who was telling that story was talking about how we break with tradition sometimes for love, romantic love, which is actually a Western construct. People didn't talk about, I don't remember anybody talking about love in Indian stories. It was always duty to your people. There was always times when, things couldn't be helped, but people fell in love. Okay, that happened. But it wasn't something we encouraged or anybody encouraged, because we were political units that had to benefit from being related to certain people. We had to begin to pull our resources from other tribes. And we were part of a massive trade network. If you didn't know this is a massive trade network we're part of. The commerce that preceded the United States was massive. It went all the way from the tip of South America, where parrot feathers were brought up here, all the way to the Far East, Russia. Some people say Japan, because they find porcelain artifacts from Japan and from China in the Middens in the Northwest. So we have a history that's written and a prehistory, which is evidenced by our bloodlines and by our artifacts that are left. And many of the artifacts that are the most ancient, of course, are under lava or they're under the water, because the coastlines have changed over time. So that being said, that's my heritage. And I had to say it because my grandparents are a big part of who I am, and my parents might be the ones who made me, but it was my grandparents who are my spiritual guides and who are the ones who come with me today. And the other thing people always ask, just to clear the air, I am not associate judge. That was a rumor spread here in Eugene, Oregon, and LCC. But the other thing is, I'm going to be followed by Kim Stafford, who is now the Poet Laureate of Oregon. And if you don't know who he is, he's the son of Bill Stafford, the founder of the Writing Institute at Lewis and Clark College, and I claim him as my long-lost brother. So enjoy his tenure, because he's a very, very generous person, and I think is very prolific in his work and how he views things and how he shares things. So I realized today as I was sorting through my poems that I have a lot of poems around birds, and I'm just going to go through, and having been greeted by the turkeys out there, I'll start with Twana, and then I'll go into Language's Desire, which is about language, and then I'm going to have Flight, which is kind of a landscape poem from the Southwest. And in Twana means Nijiskin, to follow the ancestral ways, cultural life ways. Nimipu are the Nez Perce. Nusuk means salmon. And the Tule Reed longhouses are these really, it's like an extended teepee, like if you can think of an accordion teepee that has these tule mats around it. And if you don't know what tule mats are, they are one of the best insulators you can find in the world. And the tule mats in the summer would keep the lodges cool, and the winter would keep them warm. And of course, they were biodegradable. You could throw them in the river and they disappear. But the thing was, you could always collect them and make them into these mats. Oh, and after that, my mother was buried in Tule Reed mats. Tule Reed mats. Tule Reed mats. Ooh, my mom's gonna kick me when I get to see her again in heaven, wherever it is we go after this. Twana. Blue moonlight and swooped clouds, thin to dark eagles mating in crosses of upward elliptical loops. Beating pulses, synchronized heartbeats among the Tule Reed longhouses. An old wound in the land, healed over years of corruption and charging horse soldiers. The children ran over the embankment. Alarms were frantic pounding of hooves and rifles. In the spirit silent rising and cracking bones, the valley courses with Nimi Pu souls. At times one hears music in the leaves. It is light and tinkles of shell, rapture. Runoff, torrents of moonlit ice. Exhale, breathe, deep Oregon pipes moan under the ribs from church. The ancestors sing despite conversion. This is not one voice, but the beginning of all voices in unison. Yes, crescendo waves of spiral utterances of the plateau canyons. Blue herons rise. The river returns pervasive with silver and red nusuk. In the late 1800s, of course, the Nez Perce were what was called the Nez Perce War, and it was basically the United States against the Nez Perce band of Chief Joseph's band, which were like 80% non-combatants. And they studied this war in what is that academy again? West Point Academy, as an example of really exceptional tactical genius, which is attributed in most history books to Joseph. But I think what we don't often realize is that when we succeed, it's because of many, not because of one. And Joseph was the peace chief. He had to make sure that the children lived, the elders lived, and the women lived, and that the horses and cattle and all of their things remained intact. And the war chiefs were Yellow Wolf, Alaquat, and I can't think of the other person, Pio Pio Mox Mox. And they were the ones who determined the strategy. And then the women had caches buried all over the Pacific Northwest that they had pre-buried in an event they needed an emergency like this, so that they could keep their people supplied with food, but they also knew the land very well and were able to outsmart the army and turn by turn. So that's what this is kind of about, and the other part of it is there are places on the land that people remember things, and they have a ceremony up at Fort Vancouver every year where they come in and remember the people who've gone and been lost in war, and they sing Yellow Wolf song as they come in. So it's a very beautiful song, and they ride in horse regalia. And then there are families who go to these places on that exodus to Canada to remember those who have fallen, because of course many died on the way, and particularly children, one being a cradle board left in the crook of a tree that a mother had placed there above sight so that no one would kill her baby, and then when she would come back when she was able to get it, because she figured she'd survive, but she didn't. This one is called Father. It is the language's desire. And my father wants me to learn Navajo, but I'm like, almost 60. How is that going to happen? But I do remember being immersed in the language of Navajo. I do remember thinking that I thought in Navajo. And I realized that most of my early childhood with my father, and as my Uncle Louis, who didn't speak the language, told me, would spend days and days with me, and my dad would hold me, and they would pass a guitar between them and talk Navajo, and they'd pass me between them, and they would sing songs in English, which my uncle could sing, but then they would talk in Navajo. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. Father, security is found in the embrace of the language encoded in the child, rendered as daughter. In the blue air of twilight and at dawn, dirt and path rumble under a calming trot. The sky does not end so easily in the patter of the hard rain. You seem near. The clinging wet hair is a cloak of absence. I know about water. It attracts the current by gravity and lightning by its elemental nature. This includes the grave thoughts of what protection is offered the assaulted. I am a fierce incarnation of your lineage. The black lace on the forehead and blanket's rough texture are not contradictions. I transpose the sound. It is the language's desire to move as the wind. Masculine genesis forces the water to rise up and fall as hard currents. As rain, awestruck by the sweet corn's thirst, the shirring wind of its tongues rattle incomprehensible words. Flight. Eagle hovers as a mobile cross. The blue clarity of tableau is critical detachment. It drops from vision as simple hunter. Afternoon hail, lightning and mist, light blue-gray years between birth and mother. Color-filled finches, morning doves, and canyon wrens sing. Smell sage rolling back and forth between fingers. At the edge of juniper berries is the matter of prayer. The evergreen crests collect arches of pinon to mingle with ozone. Locate a circle of copper in a sliver of rock. A burning red draws eye to the circle. Palm open with hot lifeline, the rock fits along lined path of light's shadow, comfortable in small mounds of muscle. Our eagle plume stands up in the path. Breath moves on the brown edge of filmy down as divination of the proper direction. I had the good fortune of being able to go to Hedgebrook, which is up in Whidbey Island, and they offer residencies for like 1 to 2 months, some even longer, to people, and a lot of people apply to go there to do their writing. They're like, I call them professional residence artists, meaning they apply to all these residencies and spend all their year going from one to the other. And in this one, they give you a basket in the morning for your food, and then in the evening you go and eat dinner together, and then afterwards you share your work with the other women in that place, if you have anything. And they're from all over. When I was there, one woman was, Korean, and the other woman was from New York, and anyway, this poem is about these women, and we're walking along and we're talking, and it's an excerpt. Between songbirds and crows. Here, crows are obsessive black pieces of past fires, non-stop talking, pulling up all emergent sunflowers. A child yells in the distance, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." She does not refine dialogue. She works in sound. Stop. Cawing is not idle work. Caw prettily. Cackles soft, throaty words. Please cover your beak when coughing. Polite, pretty birds are well cared for. Leap at the shoots of complacent sunflowers. Tomorrow's facade stares at difference. Authenticity singled from the rest, the best seed. While polite, the windy trees make jokes not to be ignored. Laugh until your ribs and back hurt. Learn Yoruba. Speak phrases in Manchurian. Sha, 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 shoo. Read 4,000 characters, perhaps Korean. Listen to Lushootseed nightly as Earth articulates excellence. Listen to the story. She traveled and learned to heal others while mending herself. She removes her clothes, giving them inside out. Who is speaking? Loquacious calypso. She twists ribcage left and right, waving arms above, in a fringed voice, balmy, in an orange batik dress. She calls, llamas, pregnant goats, hushes the spaniels. I couldn't wear perfume, she comments, so open palms gesture to the fir needles, bits of pine cone that ornament her hair. Small birds perch on a tree's crown. Oh, darling, where have you been? She speaks to the thumbnail lunar witness in the doe's orbit of spirit dog's chorus. With pleasures of other stories, lion claw of moon ignites celestial homes, poised in dreaming dusk, the arousal of Mars. So I think that's, one more, it's not too long on that section. Relatives. The round dance sprinkles a cod bead glimmer over the grass. The straight and rounded shoulders glide the circular path with a sawing motion of fringes. While making her dress, the woman slid the scissors into the cloth to cut the pattern of clouds for the lightest transparent blue underdress. She talks in succinct interludes to her companion. Her smile radiates into the offered handshakes. These intervals influence the design on her yoke and her mind. Creation is now occurring. The animals dance in the connection. The island body emerges like the turtle with clay exposed from the deepest indigo. Gratitude wings darkened light, the musical cadence of chaos in the space of composure. Water twirls over cliff's edge. Spray feels velvet without weight of fabric on lifting steps. Symmetrical voices merge, echo, abundance, all life, my relations. If you ever watch that real elegant lady dance, that's what I wrote about, was just that person. I have a couple minutes here before I break into the published works. I could answer some questions if someone has anything at this point. I don't mind. I welcome them. Some of you are students, some of you are not, some of you are writers. Some probably are curious, and some are just required to be here. So here's a chance for you to kill time. No? Okay, one, two.
I know that you're related to the wonderful jeweler, Lillian Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some of her art. It's so wonderful. Some of your books, they always seem to be moving back and forth to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Have you actually worked together, or is it just a spiritual feeling that I'm picking up on?
Lillian Pitt is my little mother in Navajo tradition. She's my mom's little sister. My mom was an alcoholic for she's alcoholic all over her life practically. But I was raised by my grandparents, but Lillian Pitt was like my mother to me. And my Uncle Louis was like my father to me. He was 8 years older than I am. Lillian was, I don't know how many years younger than my mom, but I spent all of my summers with her in Portland. I went to different things. And then when I came back from Santa Fe, I worked with Lillian for 12 years as her production manager. I was the bad artist in the studio, meaning I was the one who would call all the galleries and gift shops and say, you're 30 days overdue on your payment. And I would just, that was my job. Lillian was the artist. She said, the customer's always right, call him back. I'm sorry that my niece gave you a hard time. And I just wanted to apologize for that. No, I'm not saying, this is not the script. I'm making this up. But she was the one who was the artist, and I was the one who worked in the studio. I did her little pins, the production line. I worked on all the beadwork on her work, did the glazing, helped her fire, traveled with her. I call it my Lillian Pitt finishing school. So yeah, there's a lot of conversation between us. Less now because she's busy, of course, doing work that's pretty arduous. Like she just recently showed work up at the gallery in Stonington in Seattle of a collaboration between her and a glass blower, and the work is phenomenal. You can look online. And she also finished a firing in Astoria and the Dragon Kiln there that Richard Rowland is in charge of. I think they have a series of these kilns that are massive earth kilns. They kind of like go up a hill. And in one of the kilns that I worked at with her on it, which is an Onagama kiln, which is a little bit different, it took a team of 56 hours to fire. You open up the portal, you throw in the wood. Sometimes the flames will shoot out. You have to back up. Some people lost their eyebrows. So, yeah, I did.
Well, thank you for sharing unpublished work with us.
Oh, sure.
I'm also a writer, and I'm considering also making it my career, and I am wondering if how often you write as a healing or therapeutic process, and not something that you would hope to publish.
Someone on Facebook said, your posts are so amazing, you could be a poet. I write all the time, in snippets and little pieces. I don't take it all as precious. That's the difference. I got to the point in my life where some of it may be enduring and some of it may not. Some of it is directed. It depends on the audience. When I write professionally and actually get paid for it, it's not creative work. It's work I'm hired to do for the Smithsonian or for other publications, and there's deadlines to it. And you have to get at least 3 or 4 of those lined up a month and a year or 2 in advance to actually make enough to pay the basics. And back in 80-something, before I went back to Evergreen State College and graduated from Evergreen State College, I was making enough from my writing that I could either push it and continue and get published more and get placed more, find an agent, that type of thing. And I thought that would be too crushing for me, and I didn't do it. And it was also at the juncture when the Village Voice had called and asked me to give them a short story, and I didn't have one, and my Aunt Lillian said, "What's wrong with you? Go home and write one." And I did, but I got back to them and they said, "Well, we've already got someone else. We found this young writer by the name of Sherman Alexie." And so there's these twists and turns you never know will shape your fate. And after that, I realized that it was more important for me to be in place and try to nurture and take care of my family and extended family than it was to be famous. Because I had spent a lot of time and energy pushing my way in through doors. In fact, that's the other characteristic I think Sherman called me was the most aggressive self-promoter he's ever met, which is crazy because he's pretty aggressive. And this is, he and I have talked about this. And I just feel that for me, I wasn't going to change myself to be saleable. There was a part of me that I'm writing what I want to, I get published when I want to. Everything that has been published, these books and all the other works that are not necessarily unpublished, but they're printed somewhere, have been asked for. I have not submitted my work, and the first time I submitted, and the only time I submitted my work, I was rejected. And it was Northwest Poetry Review, and the editor recently told me that he loved my work, and he wondered why I never submitted any more. And I thought, well, I got rejected. I don't have time, to spend on these rejections. I'm moving along. I've got tons of things to do. I was an artist. I was also a teacher. There's just so much to do. Then there's the other part of writing where you teach, and that was hard for some people who write. It was very hard for me because the academy, the literati, the university, all of those institutions are what you have to navigate in order to get the payment you need and the space to write. So it depends on what you want to do and how much energy you want to put into promoting yourself, fighting for your position, not only that, but being a brown person, a woman of color. There's all of these things that can be very, not detrimental, but can be deterrents. And if you're pretty, it helps. If you caw prettily, it helps. There's just all of these other factors. And it's changing. There's a lot of challenge going on right now. But I don't know if any of it will stick because it's a power structure. And where do you fit in that power structure? Over here?
So genealogy fascinates me. So you said your grandmother was a Pitt and that she came from the Columbia.
My grandfather.
Your grandfather. So could that have been derived from Pitt River tribes, which is south?
It's derived from Pita, P-I-T-A, who is named Jackson Pitt, who is, whose father, I understand, was Charlie Pitt, who was a major translator in the Columbia River. And yeah, it could have came from Pitt River. We have Pitt River ancestry in our genealogy, but there's no
Genealogical connection?
There is a genealogical connection. I don't know what it is. I didn't collect the records. But we've gone down into those records, and that's where our Hawaiian ancestry comes from. So it would be the tie I would need to make in order to find out who our Hawaiian relatives are in Hawaii. But we do have a part of the family and the Pitt family who are Kalamas and are part of the huge Kalama family in the Pacific Northwest and have, yeah. And so, but yeah, there is a connection, but I don't know what it is. And we have no relatives down there who claim us. So that's the important thing, is you have relatives who claim you or remember how you're connected.
Part of the delight of hearing you tell stories was over the past few years. And so you tell so interesting stories. I was remembering about an eagle you mentioned. I think you're at some of them. Are there other stories? There was a story yesterday we were talking about with the rattlesnake, your early encounters with rattlesnake. There's stories you told about you're a world traveler, you go and get experience. People give you advice. You pass along other people's advice. There's all these memories I have of you telling me those stories. And if you have any inclination, an hour later, you can tell me if you've written about those. If you have published any poems or stories that kind of document those. I could go on.
Yeah, no, I don't have it. I've thought about it, but it's really contextual. That's one of the things about stories, is it's very contextual. And once I put it, I think, on paper, it changes the context completely, and it becomes a whole different entity, and I have to work with it in that tradition, on, the literary page, kind of static tradition. When I was teaching in Santa Fe, we did the Southwest Writers Institute, which was in Telluride, and we also taught in Window Rock. There's a really nice academy there, Two Grays Hills Academy. And then also I've taught up at OMAC. And when we were teaching the students, some of them had a hard time making the transition from thinking a story to writing a story, or to thinking about themselves as writers and why do they need to be writers. And they felt kind of, like it was a challenge and it wasn't enjoyable. But one of the exercises we had the students do, and we started it off by talking about, why are you here? Meaning you have to have a purpose. The other is you have to value yourself. There's something that may have happened that caused you to be here that is unusual. And we'd have these students write about it, and it was amazing what they would write about. One student had said that his ancestor had been stolen by slave traders and taken to Mexico, and she was taken to a ranch near an ocean, and she didn't know exactly which ocean it was. But the man who had bought her at the ranch made her his mistress. She was a sex slave, I guess. And she had children by him, several children, a lot of children, in fact. And she waited and bided her time until they were old enough that she knew they could take the journey back home and they'd escape. And so she played out her role, keeping her wits about her, securing supplies, doing all this stuff. And when she got old enough, this man favored her sons over his married sons, or his legitimate sons. And he was raising them as his own sons, and she knew he was going to pass on his wealth to them, and they would always be cared for and treated as well as his sons, if not better, because they were half Navajo, for God's sake, and were probably very strong and very smart. So she left. She made her way somehow across the Mexican landscape back to Arizona. She got home. She got remarried. She had her children, which this person was a descendant of. And then she went to this one huge wall, and she carved in the wall what were images of her story. And then she would take her children there and tell them that story, and tell them that they need to tell their children the story, not because she was so strong and wonderful for surviving, but because they need to remember they have relatives in Mexico, and someday they may need to find them, and they may need to reunite with them. And he said, and that's why I'm here, is because of her strength. So I think that that's really important if you're going to be, a writer or a storyteller. The context is really critical. The other is, I think what I found difficult when I went into classes at Portland State and writing was that many of the people who went there, they were gifted, they were talented. And I was considered gifted and talented, but I was never treated that way. When I went to school, I was not treated as a gifted and talented person in the school system. In fact, if I had any way or shape started to shine, the teacher would make sure that I wouldn't shine. Until I got to 3rd grade, and Mrs. Gerke said, "You're an artist, great." And she was an artist. "You're going to love going to high school and studying with my husband, Robin Gerke." And he was my champion in high school, and he knew I was an artist. And I remember him telling me at one time, he said, "You know, Elizabeth, you can be a world-class artist if you would just shed this place." And, you know, I just didn't understand it at that time. And then when I was getting expelled and whatnot, and I told him what the guidance teacher told me, that I was an ordinary, average person and should go to trade school, he said to me, he goes, "You are not ordinary, you are not average. This first time I ever heard of you, my wife told me, I went and looked at your records and kept track of you. You are in the top 10 percentile in this nation as far as national testing goes, which is not, you can't change that. That's testing external to the school." He says, "You are not, and don't let anybody ever tell you that." And he was the one who also got the state superintendent to give me an honorary diploma. He started that movement. So people are talented in these institutions, in writing and art and all of that stuff, but many times they have other things that they bring with them. And when I teach, I try to have my students pay attention to the other things that they bring with them, because we get cookie cuttered. It's not the right word. Like cookie cutters, we get shaped like that. We're a widget. We get kicked out at the end. Your cost per credit tuition has already been, factored in as to the success of the school. I mean, there's all of these things that put you in all these numbers. But when it comes down to your community and to your life, you may spend your whole life trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do. And writing helps you figure out who you are, at least.
Can you remind me of your story that you wrote about, I think your experience in school at the time, Mount St. Helens? It's such a wonderful story about where you said, "Yeah, we know those stories and we know those mountains."
Yeah, that's in.
What's the name of that story?
It is. I was gonna read it. It's called Home Cooking.
Oh, okay, that's part of Home Cooking. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll read that right now. There's a lot of things I'd like to change in this story now, but it's probably the most reproduced story I've ever written, and it's in all of these texts, national education curriculum texts. The flat teeth of the morning sun chew at the blisters of our old tar-papered house in the garden that thrives under a cloak of sagging cheesecloth. The grasshoppers pose on the promise of a meal. Grandma is framed in the kitchen window as the tongues of curtains remain out from the morning breeze. Even with the hollyhock's colorful bonnets up tight against the wall, the house can appear as barren as a piano without ivory. There is a swarm of colors about the screen door of calicos, tabbies, sylvesters, and blackies. They mew for their meal in a chorus. As I turn back the covers from my floor bed, I hear humming and a spoon scratching the sides of a pan. Watching the swill of leftovers sop up the milk, Grandma turns to take the pan to the cats, 20-some wild ones. She is pleased to see me up so early and smiles a toothless greeting. "Hi, honey, got to feed my livestock." She sings her good morning almost in the sweet, high-voiced, rhythmic dialect of Warm Springs English that sounds Indian. She is no bigger than 5 feet and no more than 80 pounds. I see her hook the cats in her path expertly with her toes to flip them aside with a dancer's grace. Once I had balked at Grandpa's joke about putting up little goalposts in the yard for Grandma to improve her cat punting. That was some years ago. Now I'm oblivious to her harmless way of walking through the fur mass of cats that stay for the one meal and all the mice and grasshoppers they can eat in the garden. As I settle at the table, I think of the music my grandmother makes, which evokes some aspect of the world I had forgotten since my last visit. like toads slurping up great maws at night, or the ripple and tumble of water over the rocks in the river. That is how her songs sound to me. I breathe in the sweet smell of old age that lingers after my mother's mother. The Nivea, the cleanliness of air-dried cotton, the oiled hair. I notice 2 plump rainbow trout on the counter and move to clean them. She returns quietly upon seeing me work, tells me, "You can fry up those fish." Someone brought them over real early. One relative I don't know at all. All these kids look like strangers to me. I guess it's just old age that makes me forget how many of all you kids there are. She laughs a little as she looks to my response, and out of her eye corners sit behind her coffee at the table. "Oh, Grandma," I say, and catching her mood tease back. "I know you have to remember me, if not for my family resemblance, then just for the trouble you had to take to wind me so you could catch me and make me come inside from playing." I eye her likewise, with cornered eyes. I see her catch her coffee in her lips in an effort to keep from spitting the liquid out and laughing. That would encourage me. She responds quickly, saying, "Your mother could outrun me." Usually she ends this comment about my mother's great speed in childhood by saying she was just too tired to whip her for her naughtiness. Listening to the house groan in the ceiling, Grandma changes the subject to the building of our ranch house up Tenino Valley. "Your grandfather's people made that old ranch house over there, all from one tree. All the people came to do what they could, pound the nails, split the wood. The woman butchered and barbecued the steers. Everyone helped then. They drug the tree there by horse team. Those days our people knew how to do everything for themselves, not like nowadays, where we have to hire big shots to come in and boss us around." The pan snaps from the wet skin of the fish as I begin to fry them up. I know that she did not witness the building of this ranch house. She has only merged her stories with my grandfather's, a merging they wanted, symbolized by the 2 cedar trees they both planted side by side when they married, saying to each other that these trees would grow together like they would, intermingling their roots and branches as one, while still letting the winds of life blow between them. I say to bring her back to the moment, "These are pretty trout, Grandma, about as good as the ones we used to catch. You know, the ones that would make Grandpa so mad." Grandma reaches up to arrange the folds of her navy blue western bandana on her head. It is folded, tri-cornered, and knotted on top. She tilts her chin upward. "Oh, how he would get mad. He always said I had more luck than sense. I had a good dream about him last night, that he and I and Baby were fishing. Baby and I caught a fish, and then we were jumping up and down around it, squealing. Grandpa said we were scaring away his fish. He always wanted the fish to just jump on his hook." I laugh. "Grandma, I must have been that baby. Sometimes I wish that we had some poles so we could fish. But then we never did learn how to tie a good knot for the hooks. Oh, and how we chased those grasshoppers for bait. You laughed so hard at me, jumping as hard as the bugs. We just had to sit down in the cheat grass and hold our sides and our dresses up to our legs so the grasshoppers wouldn't jump on them. But what really got Grandpa was the fish we caught. That you would just flip them up in the air behind us. He said that was no way to treat a fish." Grandma, nodding her head, continues the reminiscence. "We only used a pinhook and bait. He had to spend our money on the fancy lures, the steelhead poles. He had his science and some notion that he treated the fish better when he made some big game out of it. We just needed our fish for the table, not for bragging. Your grandpa was a good man, even though he had a soft heart about killing things, like the deer." The heat intensifies outside, and the hut bugs sing their legs into a zing without pause. Grandma sips her coffee, intermittently stirs the spoon in her cup. She eyes the spiral and begins to dream like she dreams during the day between words. These stories of old days are magical. I'm gullible and young enough to still believe in magic. The magic in the soft rumble of blood life, laughter, our great heart under the land. I hear that great tree and the cedars breathe through the house too on occasion. Up the valley, I can see the mountain hold a cap of a cloud. That mountain is as storied as our lives. We walked, lived, and lusted after a young woman mountain. He walked and lived and lusted after a young woman mountain. Fought with Waist for her in a time way before the changer came to have all this chaos beat it up into some monstrously big dreamer design. The design I only sense from the perspective of a bead. Sometimes I dream of this. I see segments of this power hanging from the hands of old ladies as they dance at gatherings. When I told my boyfriend this, he said I was too way out for him. That's how he seems to be anymore, despite all the singing, sweating. He's too heavy with war and struggle to see the story. Yet, love always seems to knock men down, to drag them back to these houses of magic, just like love knocks us down and pulls us out to the sticks, to follow that guy, keep an eye on him, just in case something might take him away by terrible magic. Yes, the age of the changer has passed, but the bloodline is still with us, and the inspiring thread of women's labor, the beads, the great transformer, and the talk of love. The beautiful woman in earth still whispers into the ears of her children. "Oh, witch!" I holler as the grease sizzles on the skin of my hand. The fish get one last bite on me. "Watch your cooking. You might get as bad as I was. I never got the hang of cooking on electric stoves. I always cooked on some wood stove or campfire. The first days I was married to your grandfather, we lived in a tent to put his brother through college, you know." "Yeah, Graham, I don't think it was your cooking abilities I inherited, but this old dreamer brain. I wasn't thinking about the fish in the pan." At this point, she chuckles deeply, nodding her head, which turns her bandana a nudge worth out of place. A meadowlark tinkles a song from the yard. She tilts her head so her bandana looks correct and says, "He sings about the rain that will come soon. Of course, in Indian he makes his song. That is why it is so beautiful to me." She taps her finger on the handle of her eternal coffee cup. She waits as she always waits in a meditation. She waits through her chores. She waits for her children to come and visit as I visit, answering her call for company. As I pull out the enamel shallow bowl dishes, I remain quiet so as not to interrupt the thoughts I see about her, probably a prayer. She responds to me out of courtesy, and since her thoughts linger over her long life and the memories that are so necessary, I again think about the music I hear. I hear songs in my dreams, which is unusual since I do not know any songs or even know Indian. I think of it as this: the music comes from the tapping of her finger, beating out the occasional soft song, the way a river sounds while we fish, and the sound of the life, dragonflies whirring by, singing to me. The music mingles and makes these songs that sound through my dreams. Maybe I catch the hum of the mountain over there, too. He's waiting, you see, to get involved with that fiery young woman he sees at the corner of his eyes. Mountain love is a real shaky, fired-up affair. They push up great hilly ranges, bed over the lakes, rub up against one another so wildly that it takes years to cover up all that passionate rumbling and love talk. Once my grandmother said that her great-great-grandmother and aunt had to run their horses into a lake and cover themselves with wet hides to keep from getting burned. The water was so hot, it took all their courage to stay put. I believe that was the last rumble before the mountain curled up for a good sleep. When I told one of my science teachers about this, he said that these stories are just myth, not fact, and that mountains don't love or even erupt anymore. I believed him until Mount St. Helens erupted. It erased all innocent belief in the fable of absolutes in science for me. Thank goodness I had heard some fact about those mountains way before I entered school. I gave my grandmother her share of the fish, and she says, as she always says, "Oh, honey, that is too much. Put some back. I'm not company." "Eat, Grandma. We have plenty for many lifetimes over." I settled my body down to savor the fish. "You know, I'm sure Miss Grandpa, and I miss his whistling in the mornings when you and him would cook together. You remember that?" She retorts, "I have spent half of my life cooking for all of you. But it was your grandfather who could cook the best. He knew all the dishes of this and that, just like he knew all that wild music, Hawaiian, I think it was called. He was a great jokester. You'd tell a story as tall as he could, but I thought you hung around him too much." I smiled and say, "You both were pretty wild examples for me to follow. I think a lot about how you two would play in the kitchen while you cooked what you called a farmer's breakfast. The potatoes, ham steak, eggs. Between flipping over the food, you would dance to Western music on the transistor radio, the jitterbug, the Charleston. Yeah, I remember how you two carried on while you thought I was still asleep." I smiled, thinking of how agile Grandma was, dancing, diaper pins on her dress, blue tennis shoes towing in and out, Grandpa twirling her around in his sleeveless white undershirt, pants always neatly belted with a wide smile of pleasure, watching Grandma's face spin like a light in the early dawn. Grandpa had a grin so wide it would go halfway around his head, especially when he had Grandma going or had her aggravated from teasing. Then he'd grin all the more while he sweet-talked his way back into her good humor. It seemed like that you two always end up dancing with a good fight, boxing with your dukes curled over. You always won with your Appalachian apple cut, half a wind-up and a quick strike to Grandpa's glass jaw. Then you'd grab his pants seat and you'd have him at your mercy. He'd say, "I give up, honey, I give up. I'll marry you." We both laughed a great laugh at the memory. Grandma tucked the trout meat into a pooch in her soft cheek, tilted her chin toward me, and said in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone, "Your grandfather didn't marry me for my home cooking. I thought you always knew that." I think I'll close with that. And more questions maybe, huh? What do you think, Drew?
Liz, I lost track of time.
It's 5 minutes till 1:45.
We best conclude with wild applause for.
Oh.